witch's brew, but you can put all the beets in there and cook them, and they get partially cooked. They're not fully cooked.
Okay.
But then you can skin off the skins, and then you don't have all that bleeding going on. And then in the meantime, you process your vinegar and your sugar and your spices. And one of the things that I do with my spices is that I use a big old tea ball.
Okay.
Actually, this was my great-grandmother's as well. And what I do is that I measure my pickling spices that are all mixed together here into the tea ball, and leaving room for expansion because these are dried spices. And then I put the lid back on the tea ball, and then I put this in my liquid pickling sauce. And then that way it transfers the flavors of the spices, but when I get ready to put it on my beets, I don't have all of those pieces of spices floating around in with the beets to leave dark marks. All spice will always leave a black mark on your beets, which, you know, if you put them out on the table, people are going to wonder.
Not as attractive.
Yeah. Food safe, it's fine, but it just doesn't look as pretty. And it's a whole lot simpler. I like to believe in the method of keep it simple, Sue. And so by putting it in the tea ball, then when I'm ready to pour the juice onto the beets that I've packed into the jar, I can pull this out and it's all out of the way. And then I compost the spices.
Great.
And so that, again, it's a little trick that I've learned over the years that makes it much simpler. It makes my canning so much faster. And then we process all the pickles in a hot water bath, which again is an easy way to process. And again, following the recipe as to how much time it takes, using up-to-date information. You can get those from the Extension office. We have one on pickled products and not only timing, but also recipes of how to make things like sweet slices and strips. Oh, fermented dill pickles. We're going to learn about that a little bit later. Bread and butter pickles, which we have here. Sliced green tomatoes.
Those are actually really good. I made something similar.
Peach
green
pickles.
Tomatoes are great. Peach pickles?
Peach pickles. Watermelon pickles. Now, I'm from the Amish country, so watermelon pickles are something that I grew up on. And when I met my husband's family from the Norwegian background, I brought watermelon pickles, and the kids, the nieces and nephews all went, "Sue, what is this?" And I said, "Just try it." They're very, very sweet. They're almost like candy because you keep processing them in a very heavy sugar syrup for 4 days.
Wow.
You take them out and you put them back in the pan and you cook them, let them cool down.
Quite a big job.
It's a long job. So after that, they learned that they had to save their watermelon rinds when we had a picnic, that the cooler was there to put the watermelon rinds in, and then they knew that when I came back for the next family gathering, they'd get the pickles, watermelon pickles, in a jar.
Watermelon pickles.
So again, it's regional. I mean, it's just like the German, dill pickles and the kosher dill pickles and all those kinds of things. So there's a million recipes out there. Another one that you need to think about too is relish. Relish is a great way to use up vegetables that you have a little of this and a little of that, or you like to use it for, on meats for marinating, for coatings on them and that kind of thing. And so that relishes, as long as they're acid, with enough vinegar in them, then they can be hot water bathed as well.
Right.
And many of your salsas end up in this area too, because salsas, as we mentioned in one of our earlier segments, tomatoes are acid, but once you start adding peppers and onions to them and garlic, you're moving it into the base side of the litmus paper.
Right.
And so, again, using some recipes so that you're keeping the balance. And if you're not quite sure and you want to use Grandma's family famous recipe, get some litmus paper, which is very easy to get at any of the pharmacies, and check it. And if it's acid, you're fine. If it's not acid, you're going to have to tinker a little bit with the vinegar to get it so that it pulls up above the base level on the litmus paper. But there's a lot of recipes out there. Again, we need to remember to use headspace. With pickles, we don't need nearly as much headspace because of the fact that it's a lot of liquid usually in a pickle.
Okay.
And so that the headspace is only less than half an inch.
A lot less.
A whole lot less. And actually this happens to be a canning jar. I mean a mayonnaise jar.
Oh, you found one that worked?
Yeah, I found one that worked because it had the domed bottom, heavy glass bottom, and it fitted perfectly with the lid.
Perfect.
And the ring.
Another way to
Another way to
reuse.
save and reuse. So we mentioned earlier, and we'll mention it again this time, this is a great thing to have if you're going to do a lot of it, because you can put this down in your jar, and then you can start putting your pickles in without having them all over the counter. And when you're doing
Very
beets,
helpful.
and when you're doing beets, it's awfully handy.
Yeah.
I
They'll
almost
stain
always
everything.
I almost always use newspaper as my counter cover, so that way when I've got things spilled or beet juice flies, all I have to do is roll it up and put it in my composter, and I've got my paper for my composter, and I haven't had to invest in paper towels or in making a bigger carbon footprint. This also fits the largemouth jar.
Perfect.
So beets are great to go in this one.
Yeah, they look a little bigger.
Yeah. And usually when I'm doing beets, I have a tendency, the bigger beets I slice up, and then I keep saving all the baby beets, and they go into one special jar to save for special holiday time, because they're just little tiny babies. But trying to grow beets and get them when they're little, just like cucumbers, that they're this big in the morning, and when you get home from work, they're this big.
Right.
So again, pickling is something that takes a little bit of patience, but it's great fun. They can be processed in quart jars, they can be processed in pint jars, and you can also process them in the smaller jars if you want to give them away as gifts. Whenever you're giving gifts, make sure you always have a label on them as to what they are, and also when they were processed, so that you can always use your older jars first and your newer jars last, just like you do in a grocery store or at the cupboard. We always put the older things front and the newer stuff in the back to keep the product moving through, to keep it fresh. And when you're transporting jars, you'll notice that while we've done this production, we've had some jars with rings on them, and that's a safety precaution when you're moving them around, because if you're going to be moving to another community, or if you're taking them, say I take my watermelon pickles to my nieces and nephews and driving to Wisconsin, I put a ring on it. That way when I get there, I know that the jar still has stayed sealed.
Right.
But when I get there, or when I'm in the pantry, they're always without the rings, so that all that sticky from the vinegar and the sugar and the spices don't end up in the ring and ending up rusting and creating a bacterial farm
We don't want that.
for things to happen. Because often, if you let them sit there like that, they'll rust, and then you can't get it open. And then you've lost all your work plus all the food that's in the jar. A timer is important with your recipes. You know, you think you're going to listen for it, and you're going to know what time it is. You've looked at the clock, but then the phone rings or the dryer buzzes. You know, then you're off doing something else, and the next thing you go, oops. And over-processing pickles can be deadly for the quality of the product. Food safety, it's still fine, but if you want beets that look like mashed potatoes, then you know that happens sometimes. But they're certainly not pickled beets. Another thing we need to remember to do is that when you're packing your jars, you need to always use a plastic knife and not a kitchen knife, because you don't want to scratch the inside of the jars where there would be a possibility of breakage of the jar.
Right.
And so plastic knives are part of your basic equipment. And then, of course, our trusty tongs, which we all love, because you can pick them up out of the canner by the rim of the jar, and you could carry these all the way down to the library if you wanted to, and you wouldn't have it break. Where if you try to use our usual thing of